Hello, welcome to today's YouTube video. I'm going to be talking about survivorship bias in concept art today. Now, why do I want to talk about this? Well, it's partially because I think this is relevant to me and to anybody else you listen to online. We all have a bias depending on how our careers went and how we entered the industry. And it's very important to understand that not everybody's opinion is going to be relevant to you as an individual. So this is kind of like my upfront video, my way of saying like, I'm not always right and you need to figure out when I am. Obviously, I think I'm always right, but just because I think I'm always right does not mean that my information that is correct in my head will actually be relevant or useful for you in your own experience in life. So let's get into it. Some of you may have seen this diagram before that's on the screen right now. This is the first thing that comes up when you type in survivorship bias, and that's because this is the most famous kind of like way of explaining this. So this is a diagram from World War II, supposedly. It's a bit of a myth around it, I think. But as the story goes, a guy called Abraham Wald was tasked with figuring out where armor should go on World War II bombers for the Americans. And this was the data that they assigned him to use to figure out where the armor should go. Now, a lot of engineers in this little story originally thought that the armor should go where the bullet holes were most present. So that would be in areas like, this. However, Wald very successfully pointed out that this was not the case. Why? Well, because this information had been recorded on planes that had returned to base, right? So planes that did not return, planes that crashed hundreds of miles away in other countries, were never recorded. We never knew where they were or were not shot. But we could likely presume that they were shot in the areas where we had no recorded bullet holes, like the cockpit or the engines. Now, this was a very important thing to realize, of course, because if you place the armor where the plane appears to be shot all the time, rather than where it actually needs armor because of, critical failures, if it does get shot in those areas, then you create something that is totally useless, right? You armor up and you build on top of essentially flawed information. Now, what's the parallel here in concept art? Well, at the end of the day, whether you're watching somebody on YouTube or Instagram or whatever else, you are likely watching somebody who has succeeded, right? Somebody who has, so to speak, returned to base from their career bombing run, right? And a lot of the time, those of us who are teaching online, doing YouTube videos or whatever, we are really, really biased, and we are kind of like focusing on what helped us succeed rather than what potentially, shot down other artists on the way. And so a lot of our information is incredibly just biased, like I said. So when you are learning from somebody, you need to look for the missing data. You need to try and essentially read between the lines and to challenge the assumptions maybe that person or artist, regardless of how great or successful they are, is bringing up to you. If you try and copy somebody's success story, one-to-one, you're pretty unlikely to be able to follow it because their success story will have been based around them getting quote-unquote shot in very specific areas, survivable areas. And unfortunately, if you follow their advice, you may end up getting shot in catastrophic failure areas, right? And your metaphorical bomber may crash. So we need to be very, very careful with how we pass data and how we understand it, because the information that is directly in front of us based on our own experiences might actually be harmful or wrong when applied to somebody else, or applied to a, secondary bombing run as we send somebody else off to follow the same path that we did. There's no point sending another artist off on the same learning path that you did if you're only armoring up the survival areas, right? You need to also armor up the areas which will actually cause them to crash. So let's bring this back to concept art. I've created some like little fake portfolios here. This is all just my work, but these are my little examples of like the types of portfolios that you see a lot of artists have. Now, I have a very generalist portfolio, which again comes with certain biases, the fact that I've built my portfolio that way. But I would say a lot of the time you'll see people who are like specialists in sketching, for example, or specialists in keyframes, or specialists in creatures. And the thing is, if you're online enough, like I am, I'm chronically online, you will often see all of these people with all of these different specialities and all these wonderful pieces of art kind of complaining about each other and saying, well, you know, I'm the guy with a sketching portfolio, and a sketching portfolio is good because I've been successful. But if you try to do a keyframing portfolio, it's not going to work. You're not going to have a successful career like me. And then you'll see a guy with a keyframe portfolio making a YouTube video, and he'll go, hey, I'm a guy with a keyframe portfolio. I know that you might want to do creatures, but actually, if you have a creature portfolio, that's not going to work. You're not going to find success like me. And then you'll find the guy with the creature portfolio going, hey, if you want to have a successful career, you've got to have a portfolio full of creatures because that's what works for me. If you have a portfolio full of sketches and buildings, no way that's going to work. And so you kind of have like this slightly silly cycle. And obviously I'm exaggerating it here, but you do have an awful lot of people these days online who are saying stuff like, you know, if you put keyframes in your portfolio, then you're definitely going to fail in your career. If you put too much sketching in your portfolio, then you're definitely going to fail. If you put too many creatures or other stuff in your portfolio, you're definitely going to fail. And by the way, this does not mean that these people are necessarily wrong, right? If you want to like follow the career path that they have or the end goal that they've achieved, taking their advice is probably very important and relevant, right? But if you want to, you know, be a creature artist and you're getting all of your advice from a guy who's a keyframe artist, then you should probably start to question how relevant their experience is. And we'll get more into this later. Now, a very real example of this, and I've had this happen to me so many times when I was learning as a student, was from an artist who was what you would call a 3D specialist. So 3D specialist. Now, I had a really good actual relationship with this person, but what I found very interesting when I was learning from them was that they consistently told me, hey, you need to focus exclusively on 3D modeling because in 3 to 4 years, nobody will be drawing anymore. And this was really confusing advice for me because, you know, I had grown up watching like Feng Zhu videos, and a lot of the artists I really liked were drawing and they were successful. And so I kind of ignored this advice. I continued to draw, I continued to sketch, and I continued to add this stuff into my portfolio, whilst also learning 3D because I saw the value of 3D to the process of, you know, what I wanted to do with my career. But what is like mega interesting about this is that, you know, this person had a really successful career because they focused exclusively on 3D. And so it's actually somewhat understandable for them to tell me, hey, you should exclusively do 3D, nobody will be doing sketching, because in their experience, this was exactly the case for their career, right? They had made a whole career just doing this one thing, and to do differently for them would lead to failure. And so therefore, you know, them trying to do their best to coach a young artist, express this opinion to said artist, which was me, right? But of course, this is based on their own personal biases. This is based on their own survivorship bias. It's based on how their career got to where it is and how they succeeded in this industry. And, you know, this is the case with everybody. Like I said earlier, you know, all of these examples are from my portfolio, and I am a generalist. And when people ask me about, like, you know, whether they should specialize or generalize or do this or that, well, oftentimes I'm probably a lot more positive about being a generalist than a lot of other people are because it worked for me. You know, it's very hard to not express what did or didn't work for you to other younger artists because at the end of the day, this is all that you kind of know, right? And this is also why, by the way, if you're a teacher or if you're trying to put information out there, you're trying to help people, it's very important to try and get other information from other people as much as possible. One thing that I will say that I try to do all the time is that I try to, bounce my ideas about the industry, about like stuff I want to put in YouTube videos off of my friends to see if they agree with what I'm saying. Nearly every YouTube video I make, nearly every piece of advice that I give is based on conversations I've had with other artists. It's not just like a solo thought that I had in my head. Because I would, if I don't have conversations with other artists, they won't bring up any of the flaws of my own ideas. So yeah, it's like a very kind of like ingrained part, I think, of the art industry. And it is something that if you want to learn, if you want to improve, that you need to be really careful of and you need to look out for. Because again, if you're dealing with a very, specific person's type of bias, it may be actually really damaging to your career rather than helpful. Now, with all of that being said, everybody's opinion, including mine, needs to be taken with a pinch of salt. But how do you actually weigh up those opinions? Well, for me, again, in my opinion, which again needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, there are 3 things that you can look at. Number 1, relevant professional experience. Something that a lot of artists say, and that I hear a lot, is I've been in the industry, I'm just gonna write the industry for X amount of years, right? Now, that's awesome. It's great if somebody's been in the industry for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever. But again, the question that you should ask yourself in this particular thing, the area where you need to start pinching in some salt is, how relevant are those 20 years to you? I start off a lot of my videos by saying, hey, I'm Daniel, I'm a concept artist with 5 years experience in the industry. And it might be the case that my 5 years are more, relevant to your learning career than somebody's with 20 years, right? Just because I have more experience doing specific things that you want to end up doing. And it may be the case completely the other way around, where the guy with 20 years might be a million times more knowledgeable about the subject matter than I am, because we've been working in the same field or had a similar kind of like career path. So really, really think about what it is that somebody is bringing to the table for you in terms of advice. Just as an example here, but if you want to work in the film industry, getting loads of advice about your rendering style and stuff from somebody like a Riot Splash artist might not be the best thing, because that person has no experience of working in the film industry. It doesn't mean that that person cannot give you any good advice, but it does mean that you need to take it with a pinch of salt, and preferably that you should get that advice double checked by somebody who is in a relevant field, with what you want to do yourself. I think the other thing is, just to say here as well, but whenever somebody says, well, I've been in the industry for, blah, blah, blah amount of years, I would always be a little bit cautious of it, because that's kind of like a cool seniority. And just because somebody's more senior than you doesn't mean that they're necessarily giving you the best advice. And again, this goes for me as well. Just because, I'm sure a lot of people listening, I probably have more professional experience than you guys. That doesn't mean I'm always right. And so you really, really need to be careful with this and understand, okay, if I'm getting, advice from one artist to another, who is the one who probably has the most relevant advice to what I want to do, to what I want to learn. The next thing is visible bias. So this is a little bit of a difficult one, but, think to yourself, is there an incentive for this person to give a certain opinion? Or the other thing is to say, can I see their bias, right? Keep opening that, their bias. So first of all, is there an incentive for them to have a certain opinion? Well, if you are somebody who is your whole career is based around selling 3D assets, you're probably going to be very, very, incentivized to continue to push the idea of people using 3D, right? If you are somebody whose whole career is based around selling brush packs, you might be very incentivized to give people advice that, encourages them to buy your brush packs. Now, that might sound very kind of mean-spirited almost, but I do think it's true. We all have incentives to push the industry in a certain way. A very extreme example is with AI, right? A lot of people are pushing for AI at the moment. I am certainly not. And this comes from, different biases and incentives that we have to do this. For me, as a young artist who kind of enjoys my career and likes what I'm doing, I really don't want AI to come in, because I want not only other people to experience the kind of enjoyment that I have with this career, but I also want my career to continue. I want my career to continue for another 20, 30 years, and I don't want to be using AI during that time. I would like my job to last as long as possible. On the other hand, somebody who's pushing AI, well, if you look at a lot of the people who are pushing AI, either they're people who've often struggled in their career, and the AI is kind of like an equalizer for them because it allows them to like push past certain kind of like skill blocks that they might have had. Or they're people who are running companies who are trying to remove as many employees as possible to allow themselves to make more money, right? And again, whether this is right or wrong is for you to decide, but those are incentives for people to have certain opinions. And, you know, those type of opinions may very much flavor their opinions then consequently on AI, right? If you come see me at like lectures and stuff, I will usually, if somebody asks me a question about AI, I'm gonna have a pretty vitriolic and strong response to that and go like, no, we definitely shouldn't use it. We shouldn't have it anywhere. If you have somebody who, you know, wants to have a better margin on, you know, their return on investment every year, maybe they're going to be, you know, way more into it because AI will enable them to do that, or at least they perceive that it will. So these kind of like visible biases are very important to understand because, again, they just color people's opinions whether we like it or not. And the other thing is, can you see their bias? So what I mean by this is just like, look at the work that somebody's making, look at the content they're producing, if they're on YouTube or if they're selling gumroads or whatever else, and try to see if their bias is, you know, prominent or obvious to you. A lot of people will actually, I think, and I really like this, I prefer this, will say that they're biased about stuff. And I think that's the kind of moment where you should really, really be listening to somebody. If you're listening to somebody doing a tutorial on, you know, 2D drawing, and halfway through it they go, yeah, so this could be, you know, done quicker in 3D, but I hate 3D. Well, that's a bias, right? The reason that they're not using that tool is because they hate 3D, or vice versa. If you have somebody doing a 3D tutorial and halfway through they go, yeah, you know, a lot of other artists would do this with drawing, but I much prefer to do it with 3D. Well, again, this is their bias, right? And again, what matters here is like, as long as you can spot them, that allows you to analyze their stuff. And if you can, you know, figure out, you know, how relevant their biases are to you and your career path, that's great. It kind of, you know, actually becomes a tool to enable you to learn more from that person, not less in many ways. Finally, industry consensus. This is just an easy one, right? If you want to figure out like if you should listen to somebody or not, what is everyone else saying? If everybody else is out there and they're like, this person is wrong, this person's an idiot, that person may be wrong and may be an idiot. If everybody, you know, let's say that like this video blows up and like a bunch of people watch it, and in all of the comments there's loads of professionals, you know, that are respectable artists going, I think this video that Daniel did about survivorship bias is kind of nonsense for XYZ reasons. I'm probably wrong, you know. Of course, there are going to be fringe cases where maybe the one guy, it's like, actually I'm right and everybody else is wrong kind of scenario. But at the end of the day, you know, especially when it comes to things like, you know, sorting out your portfolio, basic art advice, all of this stuff, if everybody's roughly in agreement on it, then you should probably follow that advice. For example, if you go and look at videos about composition or values, they all pretty much say the same thing. It's very, very difficult to have a video about values where you're going to, you know, break it open and say something crazy that nobody's ever said before, because it's just an existing art theory. So when, you know, if you want to tie this into like somebody giving you specific advice, if you're going to a convention or if you're contacting people to get advice from them and everybody says, hey, you should work on your values, then this should be, you know, one of your primary concerns, because everybody is in consensus that you need to work on that particular skill set. In the same way, if one person says, hey, you need to completely, you know, destroy your portfolio and and restart it, and everybody else is going, okay, I think you could, you know, do these things, you know, like there's consensus among the other people, then that one person might not be correct. But again, all of these things work in tangent with one another. Like the personal experience plus the visible bias plus the industry consensus, all of this should flavor the way that you take on advice from other people and how you approach it. Because if you don't do it this way and you just take everything kind of like carte blanche, then you're going to be, you know, taking on so many differing pieces of crazy advice that you'll probably never improve. And on the other hand, if you ignore everybody's advice because you're taking one specific person's or because you think you're correct, you're going to have exactly the same problem. You still probably won't improve, and it's going to be because you're not taking on as much information as you could. So just some final thoughts here, but the reason that survivorship bias is really important to understand is because it allows you to analyze and verify the information you receive. When you can look at someone's information that they've provided you with and understand if it is biased or not, that is what will allow you to then figure out if it's useful or not for you. Some advice as well is always worth trying, and I just want to clarify this because this is low commitment advice. If somebody says, hey, I think you should try out a slightly different design on this vehicle you did, or if someone says, oh, I think you could slightly adjust your values, or maybe you could do a quick color pass on this, try it. That's kind of what I would refer to as low commitment advice, where somebody's just saying, hey, maybe try this one specific thing in one specific area, because they might be right, and it's very quick to figure out, it's very easy for you to figure out if they are right or if they're wrong. And on the other hand, some advice, just requires much bigger thought before taking it on board because it's high commitment. This is when somebody says to you, hey, I think you need to, cut out half of your portfolio. I think you need to rethink the way that you're approaching design. I think you need to produce 3 new projects with all of this stuff in mind and, focused on this specific genre, blah, blah, blah. If someone gives you big advice like this, definitely go and get other people's opinion on it, because you are going to be committing an enormous amount of time to trying to action that advice, right? So if it's big advice, give it big thought, big think, easy peasy. Third, learn to identify your own biases. Obviously, I think this sounds quite obvious, but as somebody who's been teaching for quite a while, this is something that I've really had to learn how to do, because I teach a big variety of people. I teach professionals, I teach students, and all of these people need different things from me. I have some people who come and learn about character design from me. I have some people who come and learn creature design. I have some people who learn vehicle design. All of these people need different advice. And of course, not all those people want to be in the same career as me. Some of them want to be in video games. Some of them want to be in indie games. Some of them want to be in animation. And it is for me to kind of have as much info as possible from other people so that I can successfully give them good advice. Because otherwise I will just default to my own biases. And again, that information might not actually end up being useful for them, which is, goes against the whole point of hiring somebody to teach you. So if you can identify your own biases, it's going to help you, potentially provide advice to other people. And it's also going to help you, understand how you go through information that you're provided with, because you might get information where somebody says, hey, I think you really need to do a bit more sketching. And if you're aware that you have an enormous bias towards, for example, doing 3D, you might then go, oh, I really don't want to do it, but maybe I should try that because I'm aware of my bias against this thing. And finally, of course, it's pretty relevant to what I just said, but try to understand how biases shape your actual opinions. If you can do this, you're just going to be so much more effective overall as an artist, I think, because you're going to know where you are succeeding and failing and be able to take a maybe ever so slightly more objective view of your work and the stuff that you create. So yeah, I hope that video has been useful. Very wordy as per usual and very little drawing, but I have some plans for the new year to do some proper drawing videos, so look out for those. But until then, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. Check out the Discord channel in the description, check out my Instagram and socials, and subscribe, and I will hopefully see you guys soon. Thank you so much, and have a great week. Bye bye.